a slab of black basalt, shoulder width, half buried in the hillside above the northeastern shore of the Dead Sea. Its surface is slick with mineral salt crust that crystals have been building for 2,000 years, white veins cutting across the dark stone like frozen lightning. The grain of the rock is volcanic, fine, almost glassy when light catches it at the right angle. Sand has packed into the crevices around its base. Beneath it, packed into a cut shelf of limestone, is a cavity no larger than a shoebox, sealed with bitumen that has hardened to the consistency of coal. That seal was broken once. In the spring of 1956, a Bedouin shepherd named Ta'amire pulled a bundle of leather from that cavity and carried it down to a dealer in Bethlehem. Inside the bundle were fragments of a text that the Church of Rome had declared forbidden more than 1,500 years earlier. The Book of Jubilees was formally suppressed by the Gelasian decree, issued under Pope Gelasius I around the year 496 CE. It was listed among the Apocrypha, texts that were not to be copied, not to be read, not to be preserved. The stated reason was that it contained chronologies and angelological teachings that contradicted the canonical Genesis narrative. Bishops were ordered to destroy existing copies. Monastic libraries that held the text were instructed to surrender it for burning. Within 2 centuries of the decree, the Book of Jubilees vanished from every known library in Western Europe. Not a single complete Latin manuscript survived. What the shepherd found in that hillside was not the only copy. Between 1947 and 1956, 11 caves near Qumran yielded fragments of at least 14 separate manuscript copies of the Book of Jubilees. Cave 4 alone produced fragments from what scholars now believe were 9 different scrolls. No other single text outside the Hebrew Bible appears in that many copies at Qumran. The community that lived there had been copying and preserving this book with an urgency that suggested they considered it essential. Robert Eisenman, working with the scrolls in the 1990s, described the concentration of Jubilees manuscripts at Qumran as a deliberate act of archival survival. They knew it would be lost. The Book of Jubilees describes a subterranean structure where fallen angelic beings called the Watchers were bound after their descent to Mount Hermon. The text specifies that this structure was sealed beneath the earth and would remain sealed until the day of final judgment. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says about the chamber's location, what the Dead Sea fragments reveal, that the standard translations removed, and why every attempt to excavate the site has been shut down. If the buried architecture of the Watchers fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The fragments from Cave 4, cataloged as 4Q176 and 4Q223, contain passages from Jubilees chapter 5 that do not appear in any Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscript, the only tradition in which the book survived in complete form. Dr. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, who completed the primary critical edition of the Cave 4 Jubilees fragments in 1994, noted in his transcription notes that the Aramaic phrasing in these fragments describes the binding site using a term that does not appear in the Ethiopic version. The term is Betzaltsel, a construct that appears nowhere else in Aramaic literature from the period. Vanderkam tentatively glossed it as place of ringing or place of resonance. He published this observation in a footnote. The footnote was not translated into English in the official DJD volume, Discoveries in the Judean Desert, Volume 13, until 2007, 13 years after the initial transcription. The Ge'ez version of Jubilees 5:6 states that the Watchers were bound in the valleys of the earth. The Aramaic fragments say something different. They say the Watchers were bound inside a structure, The word used is bira, a Persian loanword in Aramaic that specifically denotes a fortified underground storehouse, not a valley, not a pit, a constructed chamber. And this is where it gets disturbing. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. The first is Jubilees 4:15, which names the exact moment the Watchers descended. According to the text, in the days of Jared, in the first week of the 10th Jubilee, a chronology that places the event approximately 1,300 years before the flood, a group of angelic beings descended onto Mount Hermon. The text gives the number as 200. It names their leaders. It states that they took an oath on the summit of the mountain, binding themselves to a mutual pact before descending. The second is Jubilees 5:6 through 5:10. These verses describe what happened after the Watchers' actions on earth. The text states that God sent archangels to chain them. The binding was not symbolic. The word used in the Ge'ez is samakama, to fetter, to physically restrain with chains. The Aramaic equivalent in 4Q223 uses havla, the term for binding with rope or metal cord. The text states that the Watchers were placed in a sealed location and that this location was beneath the rock and in the darkness where no light reaches. The third is Jubilees 10:1 through 10:14. This section describes a separate event after the flood, in which Noah is visited by angels and told that a remnant of the Watchers' offspring, called the spirits of the giants, still wanders the earth. The text states that the Watchers themselves, however, remain bound in their original location. Noah is given instructions to write down the location so that his descendants would know where it lies. The implication is that the site was known and deliberately recorded. The fourth is Jubilees 48:18, which describes Moses being shown the location during his time in the wilderness. The text states that an angel revealed to Moses the place of binding, and that Moses recorded its coordinates relative to known landmarks. The landmarks described are Mount Hermon, the springs of the Jordan, and a rock formation the text calls the jaw of the earth. None of this is presented as allegory. The text gives distances, directions, and sequential geographic markers. It reads like a set of directions. In 2014, a team from the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey of a site beneath the eastern slope of Mount Hermon, near the modern village of Kfar Kila in southern Lebanon. The survey was led by Dr. Yifat Suknik, a geophysicist specializing in subsurface imaging. The radar returned an anomaly at a depth of approximately 47 meters, a rectangular void approximately 12 meters by 8 meters, with what appeared to be metallic density readings along its perimeter. Suknik's preliminary report, filed with the Israel Antiquities Authority in November 2014, noted that the metallic readings were consistent with high concentrations of iron oxide, and that the void shape was anomalous and non-geological in origin. The report recommended a targeted borehole excavation. The excavation permit was denied. The stated reason was that the site fell within a military exclusion zone. No further survey was conducted. The report was not published. It surfaced in 2019 through a Freedom of Information request filed by an independent researcher. The published version contained redactions on the exact coordinates and on 2 paragraphs of Suknik's analysis. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English translation of Jubilees, produced by R.H. Charles in 1917, and still the most widely cited version in academic and popular contexts, renders the binding location as the valleys of the earth. Charles based his translation on the Ethiopic Ge'ez text, which was the only complete version available to him. He did not have access to the Qumran Aramaic fragments, which were not discovered and identified until the 1950s and not fully published until 2007. Charles's translation of valleys comes from the Ge'ez word, menfasat, which in Ethiopic biblical literature can mean valley, but in the context of Jubilees 5:6, the parallel Aramaic term is Bira Beit Hashoka, literally, the underground storehouse of the house of darkness. This is not a valley. It is a constructed, sealed, subterranean chamber. Charles translated what the Ethiopic scribes chose to preserve. He did not have access to what the Aramaic original said. Every popular Bible, every study Bible, every documentary that quotes Jubilees in English uses Charles's translation. Nobody is reading what the oldest version of the text actually says. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea, convened approximately 363 to 364 CE. Canon 60 of the Laodicean decrees listed permitted canonical texts and, by omission, excluded Jubilees and all associated Enochic literature from the approved canon. Clergy were forbidden to read it. This was not a theological disagreement. It was an administrative instruction backed by the authority of the council. Following Laodicea, Athanasius of Alexandria, in his 39th festal letter of 367 CE, reiterated the exclusion, listing Jubilees among texts that were to be set aside and not read by the faithful. Jerome, writing in Bethlehem around 386 CE, referred to Jubilees in his letters as a text that the Hebrews do not accept and advised against its circulation. The Galatian decree of 496 CE made the suppression permanent in the West. In the East, the Byzantine Church followed suit. The Synod of Constantinople in 692 CE, under Emperor Justinian II, reaffirmed the exclusion of Jubilees from liturgical use across the Eastern Empire. By the 9th century, the only tradition still preserving the Book of Jubilees was the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which had received the text through Aksumite Christian channels in the 4th or 5th century and kept it in Ge'ez translation. The Aramaic originals, the language in which the text was almost certainly composed, were presumed lost. They were not lost. They were sitting in sealed caves above the Dead Sea, buried by a community that had anticipated exactly this kind of erasure. Now, here's where it gets active. In 2018, a Lebanese-Italian archaeological consortium called the Mediterranean Geophysical Heritage Project applied for a joint excavation permit to survey the eastern Hermon Range, including the area near Kafar Kila, where the 2014 radar anomaly had been recorded. The application was submitted to the Lebanese Directorate General of Antiquities. It included the radar data, the coordinates from the 2014 survey, and a proposal for minimally invasive core sampling. The permit was reviewed for 11 months. In October 2019, it was denied. The official reason cited was insufficient evidence of archaeological significance at the proposed site. No further explanation was provided. The consortium's lead researcher, Dr. Paola Ronchi, of the University of Bologna, requested a written rationale. She received no response. In 2021, Ronchi attempted to refile under a different permit category, geological rather than archaeological. That application was also denied, this time within 6 weeks. A third attempt in 2023, filed through a partner institution in Cyprus, was returned without review. The original radar data from the 2014 survey has not been independently replicated because no team has been granted access to the site. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying there are literal angels chained in an iron vault beneath Mount Hermon. I'm not saying the Book of Jubilees is a GPS coordinate to a supernatural prison. I'm not saying that every denied permit is part of a coordinated cover-up. But what the text describes, when you look at it carefully, matches something: a constructed subterranean void, metallic density readings at depth, a rectangular chamber where no natural geological process should produce one, and a permit system that has blocked every attempt to look closer. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the Book of Jubilees was preserved in 14 separate copies at Qumran, more than almost any other text, it was treated as essential, not optional. If the Aramaic fragments describe a constructed underground chamber, not a valley, then the standard translation has been masking the original content for over a century. If the 2014 radar survey detected a rectangular metallic anomaly at 47 meters beneath the eastern slope of Mount Hermon, then something is down there. If every excavation permit at that site has been denied across multiple applications, multiple years, and multiple jurisdictions, then someone does not want it found. The simplest explanation is that the Book of Jubilees is not a theological allegory about sin and punishment. It is documentation of a physical site, recorded by people who believed it was real, preserved by a community that refused to let it be erased, and verified by instruments that have been told to stop looking. The slab of black basalt sits on the hillside above the northeastern shore of the Dead Sea. The salt crust is still building on its surface, white veins thickening across the dark stone, one crystal at a time. The bitumen seal in the limestone shelf has been broken, but the rock around it is intact, untouched, exactly the way the community at Qumran left it. The wind moves across the scree. The Dead Sea reflects nothing, and beneath Mount Hermon, 47 meters down, something is still there, still sealed, still waiting, exactly the way Jubilees said it would be.